So my name is Eli Confer. I'm the president and CEO of a Jewish Learning Institute in New York called Machon Hadar. We're on the Upper West Side, and we run both Jewish learning in person, that Jana has come and attended a number of years in a row, and also online. So if you're ever interested in actually doing any Jewish learning, which we won't be talking about in depth today, but if you wanted to do some Jewish learning with us, I invite you to just Google the word Hadar, H-A-D-A-R, and you can see all of our offerings there. But today, what I want to talk about and really discuss with you guys and hear your thoughts on is a sort of framing for the general picture of Jewish life. Welcome. I think part of the challenge of living in the 21st century, certainly in America, perhaps in the diaspora in general, is trying to think about a way in which, how do we understand why we're Jewish? Or to ask it another way, what does it mean to be Jewish? Is that a sort of, an ethnic memory that manifests in some certain salted foods? Or is there, something that binds us beyond, just the word Jewish? So I want to look at two examples of the way in which people are trying to grapple with this now, and then offer my own, which is, I would say, not really new, but perhaps bringing back the old to renew it. Okay? So that's the plan. How do I think about my Judaism? That's what we want to try to figure out here. And we're going to do it in 43 minutes. Come on in. You're totally welcome. Unless you're looking for sculpture, in which case it's one door down. Okay. Okay. So I would say that a lot of people talk about Jewish identity. That is to say, I have a strong Jewish identity. Now, there's a now infamous, famous study from the Pew Research Center that was done 3.5 years ago that pointed out that Jews in America are an extremely proud ethnic group. It was 94% of Jews who were polled said that they were proud to be Jewish. And the sociologists read this statistic and they say, Jews are have a very strong Jewish identity, okay? I'm proud to be Jewish. The only problem with Jewish identity as the understanding of what it means to be Jewish is when you start to poke and ask, well, what does it mean to have a Jewish identity? Could you please explain what does it mean for you to have a strong Jewish identity, to say, I'm proud that I'm Jewish? Well, then the answers start to sort of fizzle and become diffuse. So it's a very hard concept to hold on to. I feel proud to be Jewish. Oh, good. Tell me, what does it mean to be Jewish that you're so proud about? And that's where people have a hard time sort of articulating beyond, I'm Jewish, I feel Jewish, my parents are Jewish, or my parents aren't Jewish, or whatever it is. Beyond that sort of identity is a very broad marker. It's very, very slippery to say what that means. So the other term that people have been using these days is Jewish values, okay? Now, Jewish values sounds good because it sounds like something I can hold on to, right? There's something that has a Jewish value, something that doesn't have a Jewish value. I can tell, does this session represent my Jewish values? Does this weekend represent my Jewish values? I can sort of list what my values are and then run them against whatever experience I'm having. So perhaps what it means to be Jewish is to have strong Jewish values, okay? That's what I want to, sort of hold on to. Is when I'm proud to be Jewish, it means I believe in Jewish values and I run my life ideally according to those Jewish values. Now, the question is, tell me some of those Jewish values. Like, give me an example of a Jewish value. So what do you hear with Jewish values? Give me an example of a Jewish value. What's a Jewish value that you are proud of?
Family.
Family. Okay, good. Yes, come on in. Another Jewish value. Religion. Okay, good. You're a lot of Jewish values over here. This is good. Also a Jewish value. Coffee. Okay? So hospitality, family, religion, hospitality. Now, these are very, very powerful and strong and important concepts. The only problem is they're not necessarily particularly Jewish. That is to say, if we had the Parallel Universe Conference of name your ethnic identity, and you say, what are your fill-in-the-blank values? What are your Christian values? What are your Muslim values? What are your Hindu values? And people say family, people say togetherness, people say charity, right? These are things that are going to unite probably most of humanity. This actually came home to me when Mike Bloomberg, remember him? He used to be the mayor of New York. He won this prize called the Genesis Prize. He was the first winner of the Genesis Prize. And in his acceptance, so just to remind you all, the Genesis Prize was $1 million prize that was given by some, exactly, right, some people in the family, and I'm using the term broadly to include myself, but this was offered to him, so $1 million prize for a Jewish leader. Now, it happens that Mike Bloomberg is a billionaire. So $1 million to a billionaire is not that particularly valuable. So he did a nice thing, which is that he said, I'm not going to take the money. I'm going to accept the prize. I'm not going to take the money. I'm going to turn back the money. And I'm going to turn it into its own sub-prize. And he gave out 10 awards for $100,000. But this is what he said in his acceptance speech, which was covered in the New York Times. And this, for me, was the moment when Jewish values went out the window as any useful concept. Okay, so in Mike Bloomberg's acceptance speech of the Genesis Prize, he said, I'm quoting from the Times, which at the time didn't have fake news in it. This was back in 2013. Okay. Mr. Bloomberg said his religiously observant parents had inculcated Jewish values around the dinner table family, right? It's a Jewish value to eat together, Jewish value to eat together, okay? And he identified those qualities Thursday night as, quote, here are the Jewish values that he learned at his parents' table: freedom, justice, service, ambition, innovation. Okay? Freedom, justice, service, ambition, innovation. Now, if you say to yourself, hold on, I happen to know some non-Jews in the world, and they also have ambition, or they also care about freedom. Well, listen to what Bloomberg says next. Quote, the values I learned from my parents are probably the same values that, I hope, Christians and Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists learn from their parents, he said at the appearance. Quote, they're all centered around God put us on earth and said we should take care of each other. We have an obligation not just to talk about it, but to actually do it, right? Not just study, but action, okay? Now, Bloomberg here is admitting and even aspiring to a world in which so-called Jewish values actually are humanist values. By bringing in other religions and saying, I assume, not only I hope, but I assume that was going on at their dinner tables as well. He's pointing out that there's nothing particular about a Jewish value. So you can say I have these values and I'm Jewish, but the fact that I'm Jewish doesn't necessarily mean that I have any particular claim on these values, okay? You want to talk about freedom, service, justice, you can have any number of ethnic backgrounds or religious backgrounds and claim those values. So we have Jewish identity, very murky, Jewish values, also somewhat broad, even though we might line up behind them. What's left? So this is what I want to put out here, and I think it's actually useful, and I'm so appreciative of Jana for inviting me to Limud to talk about this, because Limud is very big on pluralism, right? It's like we make no assumptions, everybody can do their own thing, we're all together, it's kind of amazing that all these different backgrounds come together. So in the context of pluralism, which is another sort of amazing byword of what it means to be Jewish these days, I want to put out a vision of what I think 21st century Jewish life could be. Now, this is not my own idea. I didn't make it up. Tell me if it sounds familiar. I want to use the frame of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim, I'm going to translate each of them. But just so you know, those three terms, that lens, is the oldest Jewish lens that exists as a set of overarching values after the Torah. Okay, that's to say, when the Mishnah was put down, the beginning of one of the sections of the Mishnah, the oldest code of Jewish law, says, well, how did we get from the Torah to now? And now is like, 1,800 years ago, okay? And they said, oh, well, the tradition got passed down one to the other, and they finally arrive at a guy named Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik, he was the high priest, and he said the world stands on three things. It stands on Torah, it stands on Avodah, and it stands on Gemilut Chasadim. Okay? Now, we have to translate each of those terms, but I just want to say to you that this is the oldest lens of Jewish life. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying anything new. Not only am I not saying anything new, I'm saying the oldest thing that could be said. There's no older to go back to than Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. Okay? But that's what I want to unpack. And I'm going to look at each term on its own. And what I want to walk out of here with is a proposal that this is how we might think about our own Jewish lives today. Okay? So that's the plan. That's what we're going to do. We're going to nail it. Now, I want to put one, so we're going to look at each one in turn. Torah is, we'll talk about it, okay? Because everybody has their associations with Torah. Some people say, it's like my 3-year-old, the Torah is opened up, the Sefer Torah, like the Torah scroll. It opens up the Ark, and this is the most exciting thing that's happening on a Saturday morning besides the lollipop, right? It's like Torah, okay? So one view of Torah is a scroll in parchment that someone inked out with the words of the 5 books of Moses. But the word Torah actually is, it's not the Torah, HaTorah, but rather Torah, which is probably a broader term meaning instruction or learning, okay? So I want to come back to what that means in particular, but I want to offer one last frame before we dive into the particulars, okay? Here's the frame. The frame is each of these terms, Torah, Avodah, let's call it for now service, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim, let's call it for now acts of loving kindness. Each of those terms, I want to argue, have something that unite them. And they are something that is not necessarily overarching or completely enveloping of any value that you'd put on the table. Each of these terms, I want to argue, has an element of countercultural, difficult, and democratic. Okay? So we're going to test each one of them. Countercultural means the general culture doesn't do it, but the counterculture does it. Okay? So this is to say it's not a majority activity. Right? You might say freedom or service is a majority activity, but all of these, I want to argue, are not majority activities. Countercultural. They're against the culture. Okay? That's one lens. The other lens is difficult. It's hard. Okay? Nobody said this was going to be easy. It's not roll with it. It's not like I can check my phone. It's like this. This is calling out to me. My thumb wants to press this button. That's very easy. Okay? This is hard. Each of these things is hard, so it's difficult, countercultural, difficult, and perhaps this is ironic, democratic. That is to say, it's not for the elite. It's not reserved for a special priestly class, or only rabbis can do it. Okay? That is to say, even though it's countercultural, even though it's hard, everybody can do it. Everybody is potentially able to do it. Now, just to give you an example that comes not from Jewish values, something else that fits countercultural, democratic, and hard is marathon running. Okay? Think about a marathon run. Now, I'm in my 40s. When I was growing up as a kid, I knew 0 people who ran a marathon. In fact, I don't think I even knew what a marathon was. Now, and actually the numbers bear this out. I looked this up. In 1976, when I was 3, 25,000 Americans ran in a marathon. Okay, 1976. In 1990, 25,000 grew by a factor of 10. There were 224,000 people who ran a marathon. And in 2014, 541,000 people ran a marathon. Okay? So you went from, in the space of 40 years, you went from 25,000 to 541,000 people. Now, a marathon didn't get any easier. It's still extremely difficult to do a marathon, okay? It's the same amount of time, the same amount of distance. But the fact that it actually grew in popularity, now, it's countercultural. That is to say, 541,000 is not 300 million people doing, right? It's still, someone says I did a marathon, you're like, wow, that's not what I did yesterday, right? Okay? But it's something that is available to all. It's democratic. More and more people can do it. And it remains difficult. Okay? So I just want to say that it's possible that something can be countercultural, difficult, and democratic. It doesn't have to be a Jewish value. Okay? So just think about the marathon example in the back of your head. Now, let's run through how this might work with Torah. Okay? What is Torah? How could Torah be conceived of? So first of all, Torah is countercultural for the following reason. Torah is not just a body of knowledge, it's also an act. Okay? That is to say, Torah is not just something that I'm supposed to learn, but it is the act of learning itself. All right? Now, and this is because the mitzvah, the commandment of Torah, is not yidiat Torah. It's not the knowledge of Torah, like you completed the commandment when you know the Torah, but rather it's limud Torah. I'm saying this only because we're at a conference with the name limud. Okay? This conference is not called Jewish content. It's called Jewish study. Okay? Study. That is to say, it's an act. Now, the act of Torah study is countercultural. Why? Because all of the culture is moving in a direction in which you do not sit and study something that is deep, meaningful, and hard. What is the way in which, if we're actually engaging with content at all, what's the main way we engage with content? We'll look at this, right? We'll press a couple buttons, and the faster you read it, the more efficient you are, right? Facebook is better than the newspaper because it already gave me it cut out all the stuff I don't care about, and it just gave me the stuff that I want. It's extremely easy and convenient. Torah is the opposite. Torah is hard, it's difficult, and as a result, the culture is not spending time studying. Okay, so the act of Torah study, I want to argue, is something that can identify what it means to have a Jewish existence in this century. It's something that the culture is not doing. Everybody knows. You've been here for, 48 hours? You know, sometimes Torah is hard. It's not like, nobody ever opened up the Talmud and was like, well, that was easy. Let's move on to level B. You know, it's like, this is a hard book. Or the Torah itself, like the 5 books of Moses. Nobody read it and said, I understand this perfectly. Leviticus, that just rolled off the tongue. Give me something more challenging, like Harry Potter. No, okay? This is something that's hard, okay? So it's countercultural. It's hard. And yet, this is the most amazing thing about Torah. It is democratic. Easily, the Torah could have said, this is for the priests only. Nobody can touch this thing. It is too hard. If you had it, if you had the access to it, you would do bad things with it. If you get all the rules and the reasons and the stories, you're going to make up your own stuff, and we're not going to like that. But no, the Torah itself says, Lo b'shamayim hi. It's not in the heavens that somebody would say, who's going to go up in the heaven and go get it for us? And the Torah itself says it's not over the sea that somebody would say, who's going to cross the sea and go get it for us? But rather, it is close to you and available to you. Now, this is a powerful statement about what it means to have, we are known as the people of the book. By the way, the Muslims gave us that name. But it's okay, we'll take it. It's a good name. It's like, it works, right? The people of the book. But it means it's the people. It's not the priests of the book or the Ivy League attendees of the book, right? It's the people who are actually, everybody is included. So Jane is raising a very critical point, which is to say, hold on, it's democratic, but only in a male society structure. That is to say, the male priests don't have full control. Even the male day laborers are going to be able to access this, but they're all men. So what about the women? Right, and I think that this is, first of all, I would say Torah itself may have conflicting understandings about how much women are supposed to participate in the act of study. Now, how that got translated in actual history, you're certainly right. I mean, it's certainly true that women were not brought along equal to men in the educational apparatus. But the way in which Torah understands itself, remember, who was standing at Mount Sinai? It wasn't just the men. It was everybody. Not only, by the way, men and women, it was also children, right? Children have access to Torah study. There's the theory even that Torah itself was written in the language that children can understand. That it's like easier to digest, and also, even though I said it's hard, but it's like the actual words of it are not, they need to be interpreted, but you can actually sort of digest them. So I think that the question that you're asking, I would sort of reframe it and say, has Torah been corrupted over the ages to be more narrow than it was originally meant to be? By the way, there's another vision here, which is that Torah wasn't even only limited to Jews. The idea of, there's a midrash on Revelation, which I'll just read to you for 1 second because it's amazing. When it talks about the moment of revelation, when God gives the Torah on Mount Sinai, it's the midrash. This is a rabbinic interpretation of this moment. What does it say? When God spoke the word on Sinai, God's voice split into 7 voices. Those 7 voices split into 70 languages, so that sheyehu hakol shom'in, so that everybody, hakol, everybody could understand. This is not just men. It's not just men and women. It's not just Jewish men and women. It's actually every single people on earth. That's why it's in 70 languages. Back then, it was like 70 was the maximum number for people. It's like the UN only had 70 nations. I was very disappointed when I learned that there were like 200 nations. I was like, wait a minute, there's only supposed to be 70. But the point is that it's meant, in its self-conception, it's meant to be universal. Like imagine a revelation that didn't just happen in Hebrew. Language is the main barrier for democracy. I can't understand Russian, so you can have a side conversation. I'm not going to understand what you're saying. But Torah was given in all languages simultaneously. Nobody could say I couldn't understand it. So I think in its DNA, it's actually super democratic, even though you're 100% right that over time, that got narrowed down. And I would say this is true today. Who has access to Torah now, right? It is kind of an elite, right? If you went to Jewish day school, if you learned the Hebrew alphabet, if you had something from your parents, you have more access to Torah. But that's not a given. That's not the ideal. I would actually say that's a corruption. The ideal is that everybody has access to it. That's my argument around Torah. Okay? Good? Can we move on to Avodah? Avodah is service. Now, again, this is the big three. Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim. Avodah is service often means prayer. Okay? Doesn't have to mean prayer, but it often was understood to be prayer. Now, is there anything more countercultural than praying? On the one hand, yes. On the one hand, no. Right? It is a human instinct to pray. That is to say, people across the planet have a form of worship. That's not something that's strange. Now, you could say what actually is countercultural is praying in a group on Saturday morning for 3 hours. That's not what the culture does. Take a look. By the way, I challenge you, anybody shows up in synagogue, chances are a minority of the planet is going to be there, okay? Even a minority of Jews. So there is something that the culture is doing on Saturday morning that the praying act is counter to actually now, not to say in foxholes there are no atheists and everybody's praying all the time and I'm praying that I catch my train and all that. That is something, but that's not, I think, what Avodah is getting at. Avodah, service, is a group experience of something out of myself that is more powerful than me, and I may not even be able to give words to it, but I'm going to spend time trying to access it, to have some connection to the divine. Not just, I hope I make my train. I hope I get an A on the test, right? This is something that is countercultural. It's also extremely difficult. For any of you who've tried going to services, I don't know where you were yesterday or this morning at 9 a.m., it's a hard thing to do. It's not easy. First of all, you got all the accoutrements. Second of all, it's in a language that nobody is speaking, bracketing out the revival of the state of Israel. Nobody is speaking for most of Jewish history as their vernacular. And third, it's like just kind of hard to access God. If God was more open and available, I think probably more people would have a sense of God's presence. But God is hidden. And that means that the act of praying is an uncovering of a mystery that's by nature difficult. So it's countercultural, it's difficult, and it's also democratic. That is to say, it's not just the priests go to the temple and sacrifice things, but everybody is supposed to actually engage in prayer. This is one of the amazing democratizing moves of the rabbis. It used to be that only the priests were able to access God. If you were born, you had a father who was a priest, and you were a man, then you were lucky enough to go into the inner sanctum. But if you weren't there, then 3 times a year you'd show up, you'd hang out in the kiddush room, right? You'd eat some snacks, maybe some meat would roll out eventually, and then you'd go home. But you didn't have access to the deepest part of what it means to pray. But when the rabbis got a hold of Jewish tradition, they said, Rabbi Gamliel, the leader of the rabbis in one of the early generations, said, B'chol yom vayom, every day, mitpalel adam, a person should pray 18 brachot. A person should pray 18 blessings. That is to say, not a person who has a certain gender, not a person who has a certain level of education, not a person who has a certain level of heritage, of yichus. My parents prayed, so I can pray. Everybody can pray. Okay? Now, I think prayer today is not something that is particularly inspirational in most cases, such that people are like, yeah, let me at it. Like, I want it. It's like they just had the Big Cheese Day at Federation. Was like a model of, it was like they open up the White House. This was like an idea of the West Wing. It's like if the White House was open, don't you think you kind of would be interested in checking it out? Like, okay, you're not going to necessarily fly down to D.C., but if you're in the neighborhood, wouldn't you like show up to the White House and check it out, see what all the talk is about? Synagogues are always open, but most people aren't running there. It's not like, ooh, I get access to something that was reserved for priests in ancient times. No, it's why aren't people running to synagogue? Kind of because it's not really performing at the A level, right? When you walk into synagogue, you spend that time. You probably won't, just experience has taught us, you probably won't have access to the divine. You probably won't have a spiritual experience. Maybe nobody will even say hello to you. And the kiddush is kind of cold, and and we worked so hard, we were there for 3 hours, okay? So it's like, you can do things to make that better, okay? But I'm saying in its ideal form, prayer is extremely serious. It's countercultural. People aren't spending the time doing the prayer practice. It's difficult. It's not easy to gain access to God, but everybody can do it. It's democratic. You could do it. And I think the onus is on the people providing the services to make it something that the democracy would actually want to take advantage of. Okay? Torah, Avodah. The last one is Gemilut Chasadim, acts of loving kindness. Now, acts of loving kindness you can identify in many different ways. Give me an example of an act of loving kindness. Something that would demonstrate act of loving kindness. Hugging your children. This is good. What else? What's an example of an act of loving kindness? A chesed. What's that? Taking care of the elderly. Right? Taking care of the elderly. What else? Burying the dead. Right? Good. These are classic examples. What else? Widows and orphans. What's that? Bring a meal to your parents. Good. Right? Honoring your mother and father. Okay. All these categories would fall under chesed. And here I want to go back to Bloomberg. This is like, and I also hope that the rest of the world also visits the elderly and buries the dead, takes care of their parents, all that stuff. It's not particularly Jewish. But what I want to argue is one particular slice of this, which I think has a Jewish tinge, even if the general act is universal, and that is giving tzedakah. Now, in olden understandings of chesed, chesed was oftentimes understood with things that go beyond money, like burying the dead, or celebrating with the bride and groom, or taking care of your parents. But there was a strong strand that was pushing tzedakah, that is to say, monetary gifts to the poor, as the sort of quintessential chesed, as the main idea of chesed. This comes up in a number of different places. One example is Daniel, the prophet who lives in exile after the destruction of the temple. The rabbis imagine him engaging in chesed, and what was he doing? He would go out and help the bride and groom celebrate their wedding. Mitaken et hakala u'misamcha. He would help the bride celebrate and be joyous. Milaver amed. He would bury the dead. He would accompany the dead on their final journey. Vinotein prutaloni. And he would give a coin to the poor person. A pruta is a very small, it's like a penny, okay, a small amount. But he would give to the poor. So those are sort of like one way in which giving tzedakah, giving charity, rises to the level. Now, what's the deal with giving charity? Is it countercultural? Well, do you know what the general percentage that Americans give to charity is of their income? If you had to take a guess. What percentage of their income do they give? Yeah, 2%. That's where we are. Okay, in study after study, 2% of the income goes to charity. So if you, by the way, any social policy you're talking about, if you're talking about privatizing any number of government services, your basic starting point is that regular people across the board, by the way, it's irrespective of how much income you're making, are giving 2% to charity. What is the Jewish value of percentage-wise? Okay, 10 is Benoni. 10 is average. If you do less than 10, this is what Maimonides says, if you do less than 10% of your income to charity, it's an ayin ra'ah. It's like an evil eye. It's like not good. Okay? 10% is what the average should be. What's the ideal in Jewish sources? 20%. Okay? 20% of your income goes to charity. That is countercultural by a zero, like by a factor of 10, okay? So if the general culture is giving, but they're giving at a level of 2%, the Jewish ideal, the Jewish value, you want to talk about Jewish value? Jewish value is giving charity, so is everybody else's value is giving charity, but charity at a particular level, 20%. 20% is what you're aiming for. 10% is if you go below, you blew it, so you're going to find yourself somewhere between the 10 and 20% range. Okay? Now that is countercultural. That is also something that is difficult. Like, let's be honest. It wasn't that cheap to come to Limud FSU. And I still got, that doesn't count as tzedakah. I want to be clear to you. This does not, you did not give any money to the poor when you paid your registration fee to come here. You gave money, you spent it, it wasn't going to your college fund, but it was nevertheless something that doesn't count for charity. So it's essentially a tax off the top, where you're giving just to social services. And by the way, if you think, well, nowadays where we have an income tax, I know some people are trying to get rid of that, but in the meantime, for now, right, there's an income tax, and you say, oh, so my income is already taxed, so I'm already taking care of this 20%. Actually, I'm doing more than 20%. The truth is, the budget that is being funded by your taxes, a tiny, tiny percentage of that budget is going to poor people. Let's say, tzedakah, charity, is not about money off of your income. It's about money going to poor people. Then you want to talk about defense and hospitals, everything else that needs to be supported by government, garbage, etc., for sure. But the idea that you don't own this money is actually not yours. You're just the steward of the money to the poor. That is the Jewish value of charity. Again, charity can be universal, but the Jewish take on it is pretty clear. It's a particular way of relating to that. Now that's difficult. And what's even more striking is it's democratic. That is to say, it's not there is some element of progressive tax in Jewish law that say the more money you have, the more you would pay in tax. But there's nobody who is exempt. Everybody, even recipients of charity, have to pay charity. In other words, if you're on the dole, if all you're getting is welfare, the income that you earn from welfare is also taxed at 10%, 10 to 20%, that's meant to be given to other poor people. Now, part of you would say, that's crazy. Why would somebody take money from someone else only to give a portion of it away? But the idea is that the whole frame of income is it's never the case that it's all yours, even if you're getting it as a gift in charity. So you can't inculcate a certain character if you hold on to all the money. And if you're poor, you have to still develop that character, and you still have to give away that money. So it's democratic, even to the level of complete blindness to your income, your source of income, even if that was something that came to you from someone else as a gift. Okay? So when you add it all up, each of these lenses, Torah, study, avodah, service or worship, and gemilut chasadim, in our example, charity, but other acts of loving kindness, if you want to say, I am Jewish, I have a strong Jewish identity, I believe in Jewish values, I am proud to be a Jew, what I'm arguing is, in the 21st century, that's got to go beyond very surface level, very slippery terms like locks or freedom, but it has to be something that means something. Somebody could say, I'm doing it, and you aren't doing it. And this is what I want to argue to you, that if you add the oldest lens of how Jews thought of themselves as participating in the three things that hold up the world, Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim, something that is not something that everybody does. Jews, by the way, when Jews start trying to be like the culture, the general culture, things usually go bad. I mean, take a look at the Bible. Like, the main culture was worshiping idols. Every time Jews start worshiping idols, bad stuff starts to happen. Or, as God says, God didn't choose the Jewish people because there were so many of them. It actually says that in the Torah. Not because you were so numerous that I chose you, but rather because I wanted you, I desired you. So when Jews try to actually act like the culture, you're just never going to win. You want to be, the demographics, how many Jews are we? Are we 6 million Jews? Are we 7 million Jews? Are we counting this person, counting that person? It's a rounding error for the general world population. It's like Muslims. Who's winning, Muslims or Christians? That's already something. You want to talk about 1 billion versus 800 million, now we're on to something. You talk about 7 million, right? If you're counting everybody who has an edit, it's like maybe 14 million at like the max, I don't know. But it's a tiny number. So the goal of the Jews are not to be the most numerous. The goal of the Jews is not to be the culture. It's rather to be countercultural example of living out certain particular values. And that's what I want to argue as what it might mean to take a 21st century vision of Jewish life. Machon Hadar is Machon just means institute, and Hadar is an old biblical word that means glory or beautiful. And our goal was really to democratize the Jewish learning that for some particular reasons in America ended up getting cloistered in a very few and select areas like, Orthodox male yeshivas, which are amazing, but you have to sort of buy into a lot before you can walk in the door or be a certain gender, or people were training to be rabbis. And I think we looked out onto the landscape and said, this is meant to be more open than that, more people. And I would say that what's ironic about our moment in time is that even people who are very committed to their Jewish living, even people who work in the Jewish community and for the Jewish community, have low access and low interactions with deep Jewish study. So I think that's part of the problem that we're trying to solve. And I would say that we're trying to do it in a 21st century way, which means, first of all, that men and women are welcome and everybody is able to walk in the doors. But also that it's meant to be done online and not just in person, because we all know that there are certain parts of America where you can walk down the street and get a Jewish class, but other parts of America where you can't. And so to make it sort of online friendly is also part of the idea. But I used to work at Morgan Stanley. I was saying earlier, I used to work at Morgan Stanley as a banker, and I remember when I was offered to stay, and the guy who offered me to stay was one of the heads of the trading desks. He said, "Well, you won't get rich, but you'll never have to worry about money again." I've thought about that a lot. I neither got rich nor did I have to never worry about money again. But I think the part of by the way, what's the difference between rich? I mean, like, what was rich to him? But anyways, I think the idea for me is that even more than the culture's definition of success, I was interested in putting my passions to play in solving this problem, which from an income choice standpoint was foolish. but from a sort of what I care about, it was the greatest thing that I could have done. Well, I think, it was a little bit of like a rabbinic party game to sort of say, well, the Torah is really big. Could you knock it down into one sentence? And you have the sort of like standing on one foot, don't do unto others as you wouldn't want them to do to you. That was Hillel's take. Rabbi Akiva, has a different take, which is ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You should love your neighbor as yourself. It's very hard to understand. What is your neighbor? Is your neighbor another Jew? Is your neighbor someone of your same class? Someone geographically? It's certainly not love everybody like yourself. That's not what he's saying. But he's in dispute with a contemporary of his, Ben Zoma, who says, oh, actually, the biggest statement in the Torah is God created people, essentially, right? Where people is the Adam. Is the most democratic view of the world. So it might be that Rabbi Akiva is saying, you should care about Jews and love them as much as you love yourself. And Ben Zoma is saying, no, actually, you should care about people, right? And and Hillel is saying, just it's about behavior and don't do the things that the other place which I love is that they try to boil down how many mitzvahs are there in the Torah, how many commandments are there, 613. Then they're like, well, actually, if you have to really, I don't have time for 613. Can you just sum it up for me? Well, you got 10. Then they go down to 3. Then they get down to 1. It's like 7-minute abs. It's like you had the 8-minute abs, but you got to get down to the 7-minute abs. You can make it shorter and shorter. So they get down to one statement. What's the one statement? What does God require of you to walk in God's ways? I would say the problem with any of these statements 613 ways, right? The problem with any of these statements is that once you boil it down to such generalities, it's actually very hard to make it practical. Like, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, how am I supposed to love my neighbor as what does that mean? Am I supposed to give them a hug? Am I supposed to do something else to them? So I think it's like the aperture is just slightly bigger than the one-liner. When you get 3 concepts, I think that's part of what I like about this particular statement. But I think for any of those, you could say, yeah, is the culture loving everybody like themselves? Probably not. Is it difficult? Certainly. Is everybody meant to do it? Yes. So I think those lenses are still sort of useful, and also just leave certain things on the table. Like, if everybody's doing it, then I'm pretty sure that's not what we're supposed to be doing. Like, that's the counterpart of countercultural. Or if it's like, it's really easy, then whatever it is, like if it was really easy to love your neighbor, then I would say not really something that's core to Jewish living. If it was something that only a tiny group of people are meant to do, not really what it's all about. Okay, so I think the lenses here are meant, you could apply them, you could get bumpy for some of them, but I think you should try to apply them because I think the lenses themselves are critical. Just understanding what does it mean to be Jewish? Right? What are we all doing here? Right? What if I don't believe in God? How am I supposed to carry out like service, worship, right? I think there's a couple ways of thinking about it. One pathway is to say, listen, let's have a conversation about the God you don't believe in. Because I probably don't believe in that God either. And then, once we put that aside, like the sort of idol God of, the caricatured God, well, then I kind of want to know, sort of on a deeper level, is there anything that's beyond ourselves that we might be trying to connect to? Not in a state religion, like organized way, or not in like all the like baggage that we bring to the table on that question, but like really try to dig down on that. Because I actually think that there's more nuance than often people are giving themselves credit for. Oh, I don't believe in God, which for me means A, B, and C, but if we were talking about D, E, and F, then it might be something that I might connect to. And the other thing which I think about worship specifically, like, can you pray if there's no God in the universe for you? I think there's something about the act of worship itself, which I find powerful, which if you're a believer in God, is relevant to God's relationship, but if you're not, I think it's still very, very powerful, which is the idea that prayer is really an act that puts yourself not at the center, okay? Which is very countercultural, right? I mean, this is the iPhone, not the U phone or the we phone, okay? This is me at the center. This is my centerpiece thing. But I think that what prayer is trying to say, the main word that you say in prayer is you. Blessed are you. Now you're saying, but I don't know that there is a you, capital Y. But what I'm saying is the very act of saying you means that I'm not talking about me. And I think that that's also like the idea with gratitude. Like so much of prayer is thank you, but it's also thank. And the idea that I could be vulnerable and realize that I have some blessing in my life, even if I'm not thinking about the caricature God of the Bible, that's a spiritual practice that I feel like so many of us could, myself included, could benefit from really working on. The act of saying, I'm not at the center, by saying you, I step out of the middle. And I think that act in and of itself might be a way of thinking about how you might pray, even if you're not sure that the God, who again, we probably don't believe in as well, but that God is not sort of central to my life. So in our final minute here, because it is a deep Jewish value to end on time. No, that's a lie, but it's my Jewish value. I'm counter to the counterculture. I think that the challenge that you raise is one that synagogues are facing across the country. And Mishkan is obviously better than most. That's why it's getting all this attention. Look, I think at the end of the day, if synagogues are going to work, it's going to be a two-way street. I have to walk into a synagogue knowing that the rabbi doesn't really believe in an authoritarian view of Jewish life. They're really not trying to shove something down my throat. And the rabbi needs to know that they really can't shove something down someone's throat, which they usually can't. So I honestly think that like if we're all willing to put our baggage down for a second and just come in open, there's probably a lot more progress that could be done. I'm going to stop here. Thank you so much for spending the morning here. Enjoy your time.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.